All right, we're going to pick back up with the Lewis and Clark expedition. We are on chapter 6, the search for Shoshones. Slosh, slosh, slosh! The Jefferson River nipped at men's legs with icy fangs. Glaciers and snowfields fed the swift stream, which now had become too rapid and shallow to navigate. Paddles would not breast the current. With people on the thwarts, the boats rode so low in the water that the hulls were in danger of being ripped open by the ugly, saber-toothed rocks which lay in the river bottom. The men had to tumble overboard and wade through water, dragging the boats with ropes tied around their waists. Every few minutes somebody was swept off balance and drenched from head to toe in the cold river. Boils and sores began to appear on the skins of the explorers. Clark had a large, swollen carbuncle on his ankle, which he could not even bear to touch. Moccasins came apart in the rushing water, and feet bled from the sharp stones. Blankets were stitched into new footgear. Worst of all, the rock walls of the canyon came down to the river so sharply that the men could not hike on the shore and pull the boats. There was no place to walk. This is why they had to take to the water. They were lucky if they found a small beach or sandbar on which to camp at night. In the longest of the boats, they carried willow branches to build up beds that would be dry. At one of these miserable bivouacs, Lewis had confided to Clark that they were not making fast enough progress. "The river twists and turns too much," he whispered. "We travel far, but we are not moving westward with sufficient speed. We spend our failing energy moving in circles." At the end of the day, they had splashed up the Jefferson at least another 15 miles. Lewis looked around him at the party. The men lay exhausted on a narrow shelf of lava rock. Sacagawea gently rubbed the aching feet of her husband, Charbonneau. Not one of the travelers was dry, unless it was little Pompey. They had not shot an elk or a deer for a week, and the diet of soup, stock, and tea failed to nourish them for this grueling work. To add to their discomfort, the rocks of the canyon were alive with rattlesnakes. No one could put down his foot beyond the edge of the water without examining the ground closely. Death might lurk on some boulder where a man should sit. They often saw whole nests of snakes with hundreds of serpents coiled in hideous patterns. Because of the snakes, some men did not like to sleep ashore at nights. They preferred to nap in the boats. Private Joseph Whitehouse had not been afraid of the savage Sioux, but he said with a shudder, "Keep me from those rattlers. I get the creeps when I look at them." Lewis climbed out of the canyon, picking his way slowly up the dizzy crags. Once on the rim, he found he could nearly look down on the sandbar where they had camped the night before. He shook his head in discouragement and slid back down into the canyon. "We traveled 15 miles today," he said to Clark, "but we are barely 3 miles farther west than we were yesterday." And then he added, "We must find the Shoshones." They knew the Indians had seen them. Smoke signals wafted upward in the summer sky from distant mountain peaks. Perhaps the tribesmen were warning each other of the approach of this strange expedition. And one afternoon, the sharp-eyed Clark spotted moccasin tracks in a swampy place along the river bank. The tracks were pigeon-toed like those of an Indian, and they were still soggy. "Shoshone!" said Clark, "and he was here within the hour." But still they never met the Indians face to face. They felt they were being watched, yet the watchers never appeared. Lewis and Clark were now almost at the head of the river. The Jefferson had narrowed it until it was barely more than a wide creek, and August was wearing on toward an end. With September would come the first snows. Then it would be too late to cross the Rockies. We must remember that these men had no map, no chart, not even a compass. They scarcely knew in what country they were. Surely by now they must be beyond the borders of Louisiana Territory. Even today, when the airplane has explored every foot of land, people become lost in the Rocky Mountains. Some of these people die of starvation. Imagine the task which confronted Lewis and Clark, who had no idea of the distance or difficulties that lay between them and the ocean. For all they really knew, the Rocky Mountains rolled on practically forever. At dawn, Lewis had made up his mind. "Ordway! McNeil! Juilliard, he ordered, pack up. He eyed the men intensely. When they put more than one blanket apiece in their knapsack, he made them unpack. We travel light for ourselves, he explained. Trade goods will be our main load. And he stuffed the sacks with all kinds of trinkets. Lewis talked hurriedly to Sacagawea and her husband. They told him that somewhere off ahead was a brook that formed the source of a great river on the other side of the shining mountains. This, thought Sacagawea, was the Lemhi. It led down from the very crest of the mountains. She had never seen it, but she had heard her parents speak of it long ago when she had been a little girl. The two captains shook hands somberly. Follow the Jefferson, Lewis said to Clark. I will find you on the river when I come back with the Shoshones and with horses. Or I will not come back at all, he finished. The four men, Lewis, Ordway, McNeil, and Juilliard, set out overland. They climbed slopes that were almost straight up and down. They clung to cliffs. They circled marshy lakes. They pushed their way through jungles of devil's club and with thorns like knife blades. At night they made a camp and left beads, a looking glass, and an awl for cutting moccasins on a stick beside the fire. Then they stole away and slept in a grove down the hillside. They heard nothing in the darkness except for the faint cry of a loon, but in the morning the trinkets were gone. The Shoshones had been there. Perhaps that bird call had been a signal. They tried to follow the moccasin trail, but it trickled out on hard rocks of granite. Yet now, at least, the Indians knew they were friendly. Would enemies of the Shoshones leave marvelous presents unguarded at the campfire? Lewis and his three companions plodded on. They ate the last of their flour and soup, but they did not pause to hunt. Hunger was nothing compared to the success of the expedition. Lewis even shared his own meager rations with others. I'll eat after I know how we can get out of these mountains, he explained. They crossed a grassy meadow and trudged along the side of a clear brook. It twisted up a gorge which became steeper and steeper. Perhaps this was the last lingering source of the Missouri River. All at once the brook ended in a bubbling spring. Far ahead they spied the summit of a great ridge. McNeil leaped lightly across the spring. Thank God, he cried, to think that I have lived to best ride the mighty Missouri. And so indeed he had. 3,000 twisting miles from St. Louis, they had tracked the vast river to its birthplace. Still, they struggled on. With Lewis in the lead, they came out onto the summit of the ridge. They gazed westward. Before them, as far as the eye could see, the mountains stretched away in the immense carpet of white snowfields and green forests. On the other side of the ridge, water was flowing in a westerly direction. Lewis realized that they were standing on the Continental Divide, the backbone of North America. It was a victory which Americans had never before experienced. At their backs, all water eventually reached the Atlantic Ocean. In front of them, every creek and river was destined to join the Pacific. With the renewed strength, they plunged down the other side of the pass. Less than a mile along the slope, they picked up a noisy stream. Probably this was the Lemhi, of which Sacagawea had spoken. It gurgled around rocks and boulders. Lewis knelt to drink. It was cold and refreshing. The captain wrote in his diary, I first tasted the water of the great Columbia River. Far off, these icy drops must unite with the great river Oregon, the Columbia that flowed to the western ocean. The pass slanted gently downward. The men hurried on. Ordway pointed to a thread-like line in the grass of the meadow. It was a straight path. Deer would not have followed so straight a line. The Indians had made this trail. Lewis was practically running. The others panted for breath as they hastened to keep up with him. Once Juilliard, a man of the forests, made them stop as he listened with a hand cupped to his ear. Hoofs! He exclaimed, and their excitement increased. I hear many hoofs! They kept walking westward, towards the sun, which was descending in the sky. It was near the end of a long summer's day in the mountains. Shadows crept steadily across the wide slot of the Lemhi Pass. The wild flowers waved merrily as the winds of evening collected in the canyons far below. They seemed to be on the ceiling of the world. Over a rise of several hundred yards in front of the white four men rode 60 Indians mounted on prancing stallions and frisky ponies. The war bonnets made them a picture of vivid color. The feathers bobbed to the motion of the horses. The chief in front held his spear high aloft. His followers carried bows and arrows. The chief's horse pawed the earth impatiently. It was a paint pony with red splotches against creamy hair. The Shoshones. All right, thank you guys for listening.